So at EmberConf, I talked about the incremental steps that we can take to make our projects more maintainable and extensible. One of these steps was to extract V1 add-ons to a separate repository and then convert them to V2. Now, the V1 add-ons at Clark, the company that I work for, they heavily depend on Ember CSS modules and Ember Intel. So in order to extract these V1 add-ons, we first had to ask the questions, what does CSS modules and internationalization look like for V2 add-ons? And will the new forms be compatible with the existing, with our classic Ember apps and V1 add-ons? And will it allow an incremental migration? So to help answer these questions, I defined some terms. The one that's most important, I think, is the bleeding edge Ember, what I call it. That's like the holy grail. If an add-on runs on bleeding edge, then I feel like that add-on has been designed right, and that means that you can use it without having to worry about whether you have to rewrite the project in the future. Here's what you can expect from this talk. So you get to meet two add-ons that I help maintain, Embroider CSS modules and Ember Intel. And after the introductions, I'm going to do a live demo to show you that it's easy to style components and provide translations in V2 add-ons. Now, if you move code that's actually garbage from V1 to V2, I think it's still garbage, right? It's just running faster because it's pre-built. So I'm going to give you 3 tips for refactoring code in the context of styles and translations. And finally, I'll share some plans for the near future. Let's meet Embroider CSS modules. I use this term Embroider CSS modules interchangeably to mean 2 different things. One is it's like the idea of how to set up CSS modules in Embroider projects. So you can think of these as the conventions. And the other is a V2 add-on named Embroider CSS modules. And that add-on provides a helper. So it's kind of like the tools. When designing Embroider CSS modules, I had a few goals in mind. First, coming from Ember CSS modules, the syntax and the development flow, I feel like they should make sense. Second, unlike Ember CSS modules, Embroider CSS modules, the add-on, it doesn't set up CSS modules for you. I'm going to push that responsibility to plugins from the wider JavaScript community. Embroider CSS modules also doesn't care about how you set up components and routes, whether you use a flat nested or pos structure, whether you use a template tag or not, or just like plain old handlebars. It just works at no additional cost. And speaking of cost, it is important to me that the cost of maintaining the project is as low as possible because I have other things to do besides open source. So I'm going to rely on community tools like Glint and Stylin to improve your developer experience. And next is Ember Intel. You likely have already met this in Ember apps and V1 add-ons. But when it comes to using Ember Intel in V2 add-ons, again, there are a few goals that I had in mind. They should look very similar to the goals that I have for Embroider CSS modules. Again, that one that I want to highlight is how we're going to provide translations from a V2 add-on. You'll see that from the live demo that the responsibility is now JavaScripts and in particular package JSONs. So let's jump into the demo. Or do that. So here's a component, an actual component from a production app, simplified. And you can see from the template that there's one translation. And I'm also using the local class attribute in 3 different places. It's a template-only component, so it's quite simple. It should be easy to extract it. So to save time, I already went in and copy-pasted that code. Just copy-paste it. There's nothing to change it. Here's the TypeScript file, the template with the local class, and some style sheet. And I already ran the V2 add-on and the documentation app, so that I can share that the live reload works as well. So if when I change the local class or maybe the class attribute in the future, I should see this change right away, and same for the translations. So the idea in Embroider CSS modules is instead of using local class attribute, we're going to use a class attribute, just normal HTML. But instead, we're going to import the style sheet. And I'm going to pass a style sheet to the template through this property. But that means that I cannot use template-only component because there is no this in template-only components. So I'll have to change this to Glimmer component. And let's change the syntax again. then this is a class. I'm going to use curly braces. So if I save this file, I still see the component render, but I'm not seeing the style take place. If the style took place, I should see the button with an orange border and the orange text as well. But at the moment, I'm seeing the blue color that comes from the reusable component UI button. So let's actually start applying the styles by changing the local class to the class attribute. And instead of strings, I'm going to use this dot styles. It's an object, or think of them as an object. So there's a button key, an icon key, and a label key. I want to save this template file. Something's not right. Oh yeah, I didn't actually pass the styles. Sorry about that. So now the style took place. If I look at the terminal, I'll see that there's an error. It says import styles from some CSS file. TypeScript isn't happy about it because it doesn't really know what it means to import a style sheet and what does styles even look like. So I created a package called type CSS modules that's going to create this declaration file for you. And I also added a script in my package so that I can just run this type CSS modules right away. And with that change, if I now run Clint, everything should just work. There's actually an error. Clint found that this icon property doesn't exist on the styles object. So let's see what's happening there. So according to the template, there should be a class name called icon. But if I take a look at the style sheet, you'll see that the icon doesn't exist. So some developer actually added this class attribute, even though we're not actually using it. So Clint tells me that there's unused code, so I can delete it. Save the file. Let me run the Clint again. Now everything should be passing. And of course, I can use stylen to make sure that the style sheet it follows a certain format. That's also good. That's also good as well. So the style is taken care of. Next is the translation. One way you can provide the translation is from the consuming app. So the consuming app could be responsible for providing the translation contracts.add contract button label. But you can imagine that if you have multiple apps consuming this add-on, that means that every one of these app would have to provide the translation. So I think it'd be better if the V2 add-on actually provides a translation because the add-on knows that this translation it exists. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to create a folder called translations in this V2 add-on. Let me create a folder called add contract button just for organization. Create a file DED, that's a German locale. And then let me define the translation. It just says add contract in German. And let's see, something is not right. Yeah, there's a typo. So if I save the file, again, because of library load, I should see the change right away. And of course, once I change the text, add contracts, and I see the change right away. So I think it's pretty simple. The developer experience at least feels simple to me. The question, of course, is how does everything work? What is the secret behind? So I added some guides. If you have a V2 add-on with Rollup, the only thing you have to do is to install Rollup plugin post CSS. So that's just a plugin that Rollup community provides for post CSS. And post CSS allows you to have CSS modules. So I just configured it. And since we're using Rollup to build the CSS, to import the CSS, we don't have to have this wildcard anymore for style sheets. So I'll just leave this empty. So that's the only change you have to make to your V2 add-ons to have CSS modules. As for Embroider, what I realized is that in V1 add-ons, even in V1 add-ons, we were able to provide translations by having this magical folder called translations. So we can apply the same idea for V2 add-ons, and that's exactly what I did. So instead of having add-on and translation side by side, instead I'm going to have the source directory and the translation side by side. And the way to provide this translation to the consuming app is using package.json's the files field, just like we did for the add-on main CGS declarations in this folder. I feel like this feels more natural to me, just like using things from JavaScript and the NPM ecosystem to be able to publish translations to the consuming apps and also the view analysis as well. So let me take a look at the notes. There are three types of refactors that I want to go over today. One is how to provide multiple styles into a particular element. So in Ember CSS modules, we were able to provide just one string with multiple local class names. And somehow Ember CSS modules were able to parse that and apply the corresponding global styles. In Embroider CSS modules, what I expect is that every string is a unique key. So the way you could do this in native Ember, is to use a concat helper like this. But that means that you as the consumer have to provide a white space between every two styles. And you can imagine that they can get very cumbersome. So Embroider CSS modules, the add-on provides a helper called local, and this is how you would use it. And thanks to this helper, I think it's easy to understand how you might apply a style conditionally. So suppose there's an if statement. If some condition, I want to apply this class, this is what you would do. And suppose you want to apply multiple styles conditionally, then I would use the array helper. And I think the arrays make sense because we're trying to apply classes in sequential order. So yeah, arrays are just natural for that. I can show you this as well. If you don't feel like you want to manually update the local class to class attribute and also import the style sheet, pass the template via the class property, there's a code mod that you can run. Let me reset everything. But instead of doing a manual conversion, I can run this code mod. And then let's take a look at the template and the backend class. Here, the backend class looks a little bit funny because it's trying to convert that template only component to a Glimmer component, but it works. And same for the template. It automatically changes the local class attributes to the class attributes. And if you have more complex expressions, the code mod will try to do its best to change those for you. So you can always use a code mod to get started and see if there are ways to optimize the readability to make it more readable for your future selves. Next, I think this is another typical example. I feel like we often use the concat helper to try to convert an argument to a class name. So here I'm using this concat helper to try to combine the string item space dash and some getter item space. And that getter happens to be defined as using some argument to try to provide some value. The problem is that the concat helper, the return type is string. So that means that Glint can fail to find typos and type issues because we're not providing the strictest type possible. So the way we're going to solve this is to actually provide, to define a getter, to define a class in the backend class using the getter, and provide the correct type to the template. There are three possible solutions. So I'll go over one of these, and each of these has pros and cons. So you think about which one is best for a particular scenario. One solution is to use a switch statement. It's a universal concept in programming, so I feel like this code is accessible to many developers. The only downside is that on the number of lines of code, it increases at a quite large rate. So I feel like the code might be hard to maintain and extend. The next possible solution is to use an object and kind of reduce the number of lines of code, right? But I feel like the way we type things is not obvious, at least to me, right away. So you have to be familiar with TypeScript to be able to do this. And the simplest solution is to actually use a string concatenation. But you would add this syntax as const. It's called const assertion. And what this does is it tells TypeScript to try to apply the strictest possible type. So it's not string. It's telling TypeScript this is not a string. It's actually either item space loose, item space normal, or item space tight. And that way we can fix that. We can fix the problem there. There may be too many lines of code, but also try to make it more readable. I would say the only downside of this is now we have a dependency issue. The argument name somehow dictates the class name, and maybe you don't want that. And if that's the case, you go back to using either switch or the object. And then the third refactoring that you can do is actually has to do with the translations. And a lot of our tests at Clark, we use this T test helper to try to assert the translations in our V1 add-ons. And the reason is that our V1 add-ons haven't been set up to actually know what the translations are. So the only way we can actually test some translations is to use T helper. But in general, if your project is able to have the translations at hand, then I would recommend that you don't use it, because this assertion, what it's testing is that it's the T helper is equal to whatever Intel service provides. So it doesn't really guarantee that the value is correct. It only checks that the key, this contract.add contract button.label, this key is correct. If you want to be really sure about the value, just provide the hard-coded string. This way, if somebody else changes the translation, this test will fail, and let them know, hey, did you mean to this change? Something that I want to point out is line 7 with the set of Intel hooks. I provided a second argument, DED, the locale. What I suspect is that there's a known bug right now in the Intel service. And I feel like the only way to fix this is actually if we always provide this locale to the set of Intel hook. But this is a change that we might have to make. All of us will have to adapt to soon. At the moment, I feel like oftentimes we just write set of Intel hooks without the second parameter. But it might be that we actually always have to provide the locale. And I think that also makes sense because we really want to specify under what conditions do these tests and do these assertions make sense. And the only way is to actually provide the locale. So what is next? Let's start with the Ember Intel. So starting Q2, so April or so, I want to start releasing beta versions of version 7. And it's not going to be much. It's just going to try to remove the deprecated code, try to simplify, reduce the API so we can maintain it better. Ember version 3.28 is still going to be supported. 4.12 as well, but probably I'll skip 4.4 and 4.8 in CI. Everything should just work. I also want to update some tests and documentations because they haven't been updated in years. At the moment, starting since 5.72, I feel like the repo has had significant improvements in that we now have multiple test apps, multiple test projects to make sure that Embroider is working the way we expect it to. And also as we shift towards Embroider, that this is going to still work. So that's good. But at the same time, I feel like it doesn't test enough given the size of the API. There are also type errors that surface from version 5, but I feel like they really existed before version 5 as well. It's just that only in version 5 did they actually introduce TypeScript in the Embroider project. So there are some errors to be fixed. And what I like help with from you and maybe others as well is to actually help migrate this add-on to version 2 format. And I feel like the difficulty lies in the fact that there are some files that touch the Broccoli side and that I just don't know what to do there. What I can imagine us doing is that maybe we split this add-on Embroider into 2 parts. The add-on, just like Ember CSS modules, just provides helpers and service, just simple stuff there. And maybe there's another package just to deal with the Broccoli side and with the translations. But the details, I don't know too much, and I definitely can use help. When it comes to Embroider CSS modules, I think things are looking brighter. So I would say that the add-on is quite stable for Embroider apps with Webpack and V2 add-ons. There have been a few, let's say, breaking changes in the Embroider project. And each time this add-on was able to survive those changes. So I think it's good. the only way this add-on can really fail is suppose for V2 add-ons, the rollup plugin, maybe that doesn't, that goes unmaintained. That's a possibility. Maybe when we release a major version of Embroider, maybe there's something will break. But I feel like the more of us who use this add-on and the setup of the CSS modules, I think the quicker we can figure out those issues and solve them. So it's really safety in numbers, I suppose. And as for the classic Ember apps and the V1 add-ons, including engines, at the moment I just don't plan to support them for two reasons. One is that Ember CSS modules does a great job for these projects. I feel like there's not much benefit to actually trying to duplicate the work there. And also at Clark, we're just trying to move away from V1 add-ons and shift towards the V2 add-ons. So there's not much incentive for me to work on the non-Embroider project as well. But instead, I want to focus on my support for the Embroider apps with Vite. And there's a small issue. So on Vite, Embroider CSS module just works. So I took the project from the repo, the Embroider repo, last Friday, and I was able to install the CSS module for Vite in about 30 minutes, and it just works. Here's what you have to do. Just add this 5 lines to the Vite configuration. The other files are the standard Embroider CSS modules configurations. And in your components and Rails, you can use, for example, GTS files. So here's Ember template import. And in Rails, if you like to use Ember Rail template, that's also possible. And of course, you can write tests as well. And Vite also provides this thing called Lightning CSS. I suppose it's the newest way to do CSS modules. So if you want to try that out, you can definitely can as well. I think that's about it. Yeah, if you'd like to learn more, you can visit these 3 links and ask me questions on either here, now, or on Discord. Thanks.